I'm 60 years old now, and my hands tremble as I force myself to speak this truth aloud, because some secret stiffen inside a person like old scars. I never believed the day would come when silence hurt more than confession, yet here I am, staring into the low lantern glow of my cabin, hoping that by releasing these words, I might finally breathe again. What I'm about to share didn't begin as legend or wonder. It began on a cold night in the spring of 1993, a night I expected to pass without consequence. I didn't know then that one sound could split a life into before and after. Back then I was 30, freshly alone, learning the rhythm of a quiet house. The cabin my parents built stood miles from town, tucked between pines so tall they shut out the sky. I filled my days with chores, cutting wood, patching shingles, tending the small garden that refused to quit. Yet even in the stillness, I felt something waiting, like the woods were holding their breath. The storm came after dusk. Wind slapped the shutters, rain hammered the roof, and I sat near the wood stove pretending to read. Then a sound cut through the storm, deep, deliberate, heavier than any falling branch. Something brushed the far cabin wall with a force that rippled through the floorboards. I froze, listening, heart pounding. For a moment, only wind answered. Then came another noise, closer, slower, as a weight dragged across wet ground. A cold dread crept along my arms. Sleep barely touched me. Every shift of the storm felt like footsteps circling the cabin. When dawn finally pushed through the clouds, I stepped outside, boots sinking into softened earth. That's when I saw them. Not tracks, craters. Impressions a foot wide, sunk deep as if by something impossibly heavy. They circled the cabin once, then vanished into the trees. A chill shot through me as I touched the pooled rainwater. Something had stood here while I slept. Fear should have driven me inside. Instead, I felt a strange pull, a curiosity stronger than caution. The morning mist hung low among the ferns, muffling the world. I followed the prints until the trail dissolved into tangled brush. I might have turned back if not for the faint sound carried through the damp air, a strained exhale, almost human. Instinct pushed me forward. Behind the shed, half hidden by broken branches, lay a massive shape. At first all I saw was dark, matted fur and the slow rise of a broad chest. Then it shifted, and I saw an eye, dark, reflective, full of pain. The creature wasn't fearsome in that moment. It was wounded, breath fogging the air in short, uneven bursts. The smell of wet fur and blood thickened around us. I should have run. Every old warning pressed into me by childhood urged retreat. But the creature didn't lunge or bare its teeth. It simply watched, trembling, waiting to see what I would choose. And something inside me moved, some old echo of compassion I thought had withered. I recognized the look of something trying to survive. I'd seen it in myself. I raised my hand slowly, speaking softly though my voice shook. I told it I wouldn't touch it. I told it I meant no harm. The creature's breathing steadied a little. Then the branches shifted, revealing the wound. A deep gash along its side, blood dried dark against the fur. A wound like that could end anything. Without thinking, I backed away and hurried into the cabin. My hands trembled as I gathered warm water, cloth, and an old blanket. When I returned, the creature attempted to rise but collapsed with a groan that pierced me. Its massive shoulders shook. I knelt a few feet away and set the blanket down, careful not to move too quickly. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, with slow effort, it extended one enormous hand toward the edge of the blanket and dragged it closer. The gesture was small, trembling, almost childlike. But its meaning struck deep. It trusted me. That realization settled heavier than fear. Something wordless passed between us, an understanding neither of us had expected. I didn't know what this being was, or how it had been hurt, or whether helping it would tangle my life in consequences beyond imagining. But kindness rose in me stronger than fear. I offered water without touching it. The creature's eyes followed each motion, warily yet without hostility. Mist curled through the trees as morning brightened, and a strange stillness settled over us. The creature drank in shaky gulps, its breaths uneven. The world narrowed to this fragile moment, this quiet crossroads. My heart beat hard, not from terror now, but from the impossible certainty that a boundary had been crossed. As I knelt there, I felt an unexpected stirring, a sense that the silence I had lived with for years was giving way to something larger, something that demanded courage I wasn't sure I still possessed. The woods around us felt different too, as if they recognized what I had done and were already shifting to hide the consequences. Helping it would bind me to a future I couldn't yet see, but turning away felt unthinkable. Some part of me sensed our fates had already begun to twist together. Still, I hesitated, feeling the weight of decisions I didn't yet understand settling across my shoulders like a silent warning from the trees. I breathed once, steadying myself before what truly came next. If I had known how deeply our stories would entwine, how saving its life would tie me to dangers far beyond the forest, I might have turned back. But that morning, kneeling beside a wounded giant as the storm clouds thinned, all I felt was the pull of a choice already made. And I didn't yet realize that this act of mercy would become the first thread in a secret that would shape the next 30 years of my life. I didn't understand the weight of my decision until the morning after I helped him drink. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, but inside me something new had settled, an unsettling blend of fear and responsibility. When I stepped outside, the creature was still there behind the shed, curled into himself like a wounded animal refusing to surrender. His breaths were shallow, steam rising in little bursts that drifted into the cool spring air. I approached slowly, murmuring soft words I hoped meant something, and he lifted his head with a tired groan, watching me with quiet alertness that made my heart ease. I could tell he remembered that I'd helped him, and somehow that made the moment feel heavier than the night before. Over the next few days I returned to him again and again, carrying warm water, scraps of food, and clean cloth. He accepted what I offered, though every movement he made seemed calculated, as if he was measuring the danger of my kindness. I cleaned his wound as best I could without touching more than necessary, and each time he flinched, I apologized under my breath, unsure whether he understood but needing to say it anyway. The smell of blood lingered thick in the air, mixed with damp fur and pine, and though the sight of the gash churned my stomach, I kept working. I'd spent years healing small things, stray cats, injured birds, the occasional neighbor's dog. But this was different. This felt like trying to hold up a part of the world I had never known existed. His strength returned slowly. Within a week, he was able to sit up without trembling. By the end of the second, he could stand for short moments, towering over me in a way that would have terrified me if not for the strange gentleness in his posture. He looked at me with an intensity one didn't quite understand. Curiosity, caution, maybe gratitude. I began talking to him more, though he never spoke back. He made sounds, low rumbles, breathy chuffs, soft clicks, but each seemed deliberate, shaped by thought rather than instinct. One afternoon, when I told him I needed to gather firewood, he repeated the soft chuff twice, as though acknowledging my departure. I walked back to the cabin with my heart beating too fast, unsure what I'd just witnessed. As spring shifted toward summer, I worried he couldn't stay hidden behind the shed. Hunters occasionally crossed through my land, and the open yard offered little cover. I led him deeper into the forest, guiding him step by cautious step toward a ravine choked with moss and fallen branches. The air turned cooler beneath the thick canopy, rich with the scent of earth and sap. I found a hollow beneath a cluster of wind-felled trees, sheltered from rain and hidden from view unless someone knew exactly where to look. He studied the space for a long moment, then settled inside it with a tired sigh, as though accepting it as temporary sanctuary. And for the first time since he'd appeared in my life, I felt relief loosen something tight inside my chest. Our routine changed. Each morning I brought food, berries, fish, whatever the land or my kitchen could provide. I learned what he liked, what made him recoil, and what made him huff with what I dared to believe was contentment. Sometimes he brought things to me, a smooth stone, a bundle of leaves, once even a cluster of wildflowers clutched delicately in his huge hand. I didn't know if these were gifts or communication, but each one warmed me more than I expected. Loneliness had been my quiet companion for years, settling into the corners of my life like dust, unnoticed until something disturbed it. And now, every day I spent with him swept a little more of it away. Seasons passed. The summer heat pressed thick against the woods, drawing insects that buzzed through the warm air, but he endured it with a patient stillness that mirrored the trees around him. When autumn came, the world turned gold and brittle, and I watched him tilt his head back to listen to the dry rustle of leaves. Winter hit hard that first year, snow piling high against the cabin walls, and for weeks I worried the cold would undo all his progress. Yet he bore it like a creature forged from the forest bones. Sometimes, When winds howled like grief across the treetops, he appeared at the edge of my yard, standing silent and watchful until I stepped outside to reassure him. By the middle of 1994, trust had settled between us like a fragile bridge. He allowed me to touch his arm while checking the old scar. He mimicked certain gestures, raising a hand when I waved, lowering his head when I asked him to stay hidden. I didn't give him a name at first. It felt wrong, like putting a leash on something wild. But one evening, while watching him sift through smooth river stones he collected, the word slipped from my mouth. Ash! It fit him. The color of his dark fur in twilight, the soft understanding in his eyes, the quiet strength he carried like an old fire still glowing beneath the surface. He didn't react at first, but when I said it again, he touched his chest lightly, then touched mine. The gesture nearly broke me. As the years unfolded, the forest became our shared world. I taught him small things, how to wrap cloth around his hands in winter, how to signal danger by tapping twice on a tree trunk, how to hide his tracks by sweeping branches behind him. In return, he taught me subtle signs I'd never noticed, how birds fell silent when strangers neared, how the ground changed under the weight of predators, how to read the wind for warnings. He was no beast. He was a survivor shaped by a world older and harsher than mine. But trust, no matter how carefully tended, carries its own dangers. By late 1996, rumors had begun drifting through town. Talk of strange footprints found near the river, of livestock vanishing without a trace, of eerie cries echoing through the hills at night. I heard hunters whispering at the diner, comparing stories, sharpening their interest with every unsettling detail. And each rumor felt like another step closing in around us, tightening the world we'd carved together in the silence of the woods. The night I realized trouble was coming, I stood on my porch watching fog curl between the trees like smoke rising from an unseen fire. Somewhere deep in the woods, Ash tapped twice on a hollow trunk, a warning we'd agreed upon. The sound echoed faintly through the stillness, and a cold dread crept over me. Something was shifting out there, something inching closer. And as I stepped back into the cabin, heart racing with the knowledge I didn't want to face, I understood that the years we'd been borrowing were running out faster than I could stop them. By 1997, the woods no longer felt like my private sanctuary, but like a stage where unseen eyes scanned every shadow. The hunters' rumors had grown louder, and each new story seemed to drift closer to the truth I'd spent years protecting. I tried to reassure myself that people enjoyed embellishment, that tall tales were part of mountain living. But there were nights when even the wind sounded suspicious, carrying echoes of fear I couldn't quite name. And then the trucks arrived, unmarked, matte black, rolling down the dirt road like storm clouds on wheels. I watched them from my window, breath held tight, as men in heavy jackets stepped out and began speaking to neighbors. That was the moment I knew the danger wasn't imagination anymore. It had found us. I kept my distance, pretending to chop wood while listening to their voices drift on the air. They asked about strange noises, about missing cows, about unusual wildlife behavior. Their tone wasn't curious. It was clinical, clipped, the way someone sounds when they already know the answer but want you to admit it. I felt their questions pressing against the walls of my life, probing for cracks. And all the while I worried where Ash was, whether he sensed a shift or if he wandered too near. Every thud of an axe felt like a heartbeat too loud. The next day the men returned, this time wearing badges that didn't quite match their plain clothes. Federal agents, though none said the word. They brought maps, surveyed the land, and walked through the woods with equipment that hummed softly under the sunlight. I watched them sweep handheld scanners across the trees, pausing each time the devices flickered red. When one of the agents lifted a camera with a lens long enough to capture the moon, I felt my stomach twist. They weren't looking for a story. They were hunting evidence. Ash seemed to sense a shift even before I told him. When I found him in the hollow, the air around him felt taut, his wide shoulders drawn tight as if bracing for a storm. He paced in slow circles, his heavy footsteps sinking deep into the moss, eyes constantly darting toward distant sounds. I tried to explain what was happening, my voice low, filled with worry I couldn't hide. He listened, brow creasing in a way I'd come to recognize as understanding, though not in words. His hand touched my shoulder gently, and for a moment I wished I could collapse into that touch, let him hold the fear for both of us. But fear clung to me stubbornly, reminding me of how fragile our world really was. Not long after, hikers reported seeing something large near the river. The story reached town by evening, spreading through whispers that tasted like electricity. That night, Ash didn't return to the ravine. I sat awake waiting, lantern flickering, dread tightening around my ribs. Hours passed before I heard the soft thump of his footsteps outside my yard. When I stepped out, he stood rigid in the moonlight, his fur dusted with frost, his expression haunted. I could see it in his eyes. He'd come too close to being seen. I scolded him, voice breaking more from fear than anger, and he lowered his head like a reprimanded child. The shame in his posture nearly unraveled me, but I forced myself to stand firm. One mistake could destroy everything. The following weeks became a quiet war. Agents pressed deeper into the woods. Drones buzzed through the treetops like mechanical hornets. I found motion cameras strapped to trunks along trails I used daily. And once, while gathering kindling, I discovered boot prints near Ash Sanctuary, fresh, heavy, precise. I erased what I could, dragging branches across the dirt, but my hands shook the entire time. It was only a matter of time before they found something I couldn't hide. One afternoon I returned from town to find an agent at my cabin door. He smiled politely, though the smile never reached his eyes. He asked if I'd noticed anything strange, animals acting oddly, trees damaged, prints in the dirt. I lied with the steadiness of someone who's had years of practice. But as he left, he paused, scanning the woods as though they whispered secrets behind my back. "If you see anything," he said, "call us first." There was a weight in the word first that chilled me long after he walked away. That night, snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting through the air like ashes from an unseen fire. The cold seeped into my bones as I wrapped myself in a blanket and stepped outside to check the yard. I didn't hear Ash approach. I just felt the air shift. When I turned, he was there at the edge of the trees, breathing heavily, his fur speckled with snowflakes. He reached out, touching my sleeve, then gestured toward the forest with urgency. I followed him across frozen ground until we reached the ravine. The hollow was overturned, branches scattered, bedding torn apart, the earth churned by boot prints and claw marks. The agents had found his shelter. My heart crumpled. I knelt in the snow, fingers brushing the ground where he had slept for years, the place he had trusted to keep him hidden. Ash crouched beside me, his breath steaming, a quiet rumble vibrating through his chest. It wasn't anger. It was fear, a deep, ancient fear that made the woods feel suddenly too small. I took his arm, and he leaned into me with a heaviness that nearly brought me to tears. For the first time since we met, I saw him not as a creature capable of surviving storms, but as someone who needed me as much as I needed him. We spent the next days in constant vigilance. I taught him new signals, quicker paths, safer hiding places. But every morning I woke with a sense of time slipping through my fingers like water I couldn't cup tightly enough. The agents were tightening their net. Each drone pass felt lower. Each radio crackle sounded closer. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, bracing for the inevitable. Then came the night everything changed. The temperature dropped sharply, and a hard wind blew in from the north, rattling the windows with restless urgency. I lay awake listening to the trees groan and shift, when suddenly a distant sound cut through the storm, a faint metallic ping, like something striking a hollow surface. I sat upright, senses sharpening. Another ping followed, then another, each one closer, more deliberate. I knew that sound. It wasn't wind. It wasn't wildlife. It was equipment. And in that moment, with the storm howling around my cabin and fear thickening the air, I realized the truth I'd tried so hard not to face. They weren't searching aimlessly anymore. They were closing in on something real. And whatever happened next would pull both Ash and me into a danger neither of us was prepared to outrun. The metallic pings grew sharper as the storm thickened, each one echoing through the trees like a nail hammered into the coffin of the life Ash and I had built. I slipped on my coat with trembling hands, lantern swinging wildly as I hurried to the back door. The wind hit me like a wall, snow swirling in frantic circles, the night swallowing sound in heavy gulps. But beneath the storm's chaos, I heard something unmistakable, the clipped radio murmurs of men who knew exactly where they were going. Panic rose in my throat, metallic and bitter. Ash needed to know. He needed to run before it was too late. I pushed into the forest, boots crunching through fresh snow, breath tearing from my lungs in white bursts. Branches whipped against my face, but I kept going, calling his name softly into the storm. The woods felt sharper now, every shadow a threat, every gust carrying danger. When I reached the ravine, the lantern light barely pierced the darkness. I called again, louder this time, praying he wasn't too far. And then, from deeper in the trees, his silhouette emerged, massive, hunched, but unmistakably him. Relief washed through me so fast I nearly collapsed. He approached with urgency, snow melting in his fur, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. I didn't waste time explaining. I grabbed his arm, tugging him toward the deeper woods, urging him to run. But he resisted, planting his weight like a boulder. He looked at me, then back toward the distant voices slicing through the storm, and I saw familiar resolve settle over him, the same quiet stubbornness he'd shown the day he first stood to shield me from danger. He touched my chest lightly, then pointed toward the cabin, as if asking whether I was safe. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I begged him to leave, to vanish into the mountains where no one could follow. He didn't move. His breath rumbled low, a sound full of worry, as if he feared losing me more than being found. The first flashlight beam cut through the trees, sweeping across the snow like a blade of light. I ducked instinctively, pulling Ash with me behind a downed cedar. The storm muted the agent's footsteps, but couldn't hide them entirely. I heard dogs barking, straining against leashes. Ash tensed beside me, muscles bunching like coiled rope. I pressed my hand to his arm, trying to steady him, though my own fear felt like a fire burning through my skin. The beams drew closer, slicing through branches, drawing near enough that I could see the snowflakes swirling in the glow. The agent's silhouettes moved with brutal coordination, weapons raised, scanning every direction. We couldn't stay hidden. They had surrounded the ravine. Ash tugged my coat gently, guiding me toward a narrow crevice between two boulders. It wasn't large enough for him, but he pushed me toward it anyway, urging me to hide. The realization hit me with devastating clarity. He intended to draw them away. I shook my head violently, clutching his arm, refusing to abandon him. But he cupped his hand around the back of my head, touching his forehead to mine in a gesture so human it broke something inside me. His breath was warm against my cheek, steady and certain, as though he had already accepted whatever fate waited on the other side of the storm. A gunshot cracked through the woods, sharp, shocking, final. Not aimed, but close enough that the bark exploded off a nearby tree. Ash jerked, turning toward the sound. I reached for him, but he stepped away from the crevice, straightening to his full height. Snow drifted down his shoulders like ash from a dying fire. Another shot rang out, followed by a shout, "Target sighted." I stumbled from the hiding place, screaming that they were wrong, that he wasn't dangerous, but the wind swallowed my voice. Ash stood between me and the approaching line of agents, his arms spread wide as if he could shield me from the world. Floodlights flashed across the ravine, turning night into a blinding white wasteland. The storm roared louder, as if nature itself was protesting what was about to happen. The agents halted, weapons raised, breaths harsh in the freezing air. I pushed forward, slipping in the snow, trying to reach Ash's side. Someone yelled at me to get back. Another warned that they would fire if I didn't move. But I wouldn't. I stood beside him, my hand gripping his fur, trembling from cold and fear. I shouted that he was hurt, that he was intelligent, that he wasn't a threat. My words scattered uselessly into the wind. A warning shot was fired at the ground, but Ash didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted, stepping slightly in front of me. The agent shouted again, voices cracking with urgency. And then one of the rifles jerked, whether from fear or cold or a moment of panicked reflex. I will never know. The shot echoed across the ravine like the tearing of the world itself. Ash staggered. His huge frame lurched backward, then forward, then sank to one knee as the snow around him bloomed red. I caught him instinctively, my arms wrapping around his chest though he was far too heavy for me to hold. His breath hitched, warm and wet against my shoulder. I kept whispering that it was going to be all right, that I was here, that I wasn't going to let go. His hand rose slowly, trembling as it brushed my cheek with a gentleness that shamed every human in that clearing. His eyes found mine, deep, ancient, full of a trust one didn't deserve, and for a heartbeat, we existed in a world untouched by violence. Then his breath slowed. The storm seemed quiet as his weight eased forward, settling against me. I held him as tightly as I could, sobbing into his fur, feeling the life leave him in small, slipping fragments. The agents lowered their weapons one by one, some with trembling hands, others with faces drained of color. No one spoke. The world fell hollow, as if all sound had been swallowed by the void left in his absence. They carried his body away with an unexpected reverence, moving slowly, heads bowed. I followed them until my legs failed, collapsing into the snow as the storm began to lift. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with pale colors that felt undeservedly gentle. In that fragile light, I realized a truth I had avoided for years. Some bonds are worth every risk, even if they end in heartbreak. And now, as I speak these words decades later, I feel his presence still, quiet, protective, lingering in the shadows of memory. If there's a world beyond this one, I hope he's running free, far from fear, far from hunters, far from the cold that took him. Because even now, when the wind rustles through the trees at dusk, I swear I hear his footsteps, soft and steady, walking beside me one last time. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.